Chapter 8. The Soul Takers. The Dueling Hearts took things easy for the next few days. They kept active, of course, but even Tucker, who thrived on all things to do with fighting, even the soreness that comes after, found it necessary to limit himself in the wake of the exhibition match. During this period, Jen and Tucker told Joe about their meeting with Eric, and, after some serious thought, Joe went to meet with him as well. By the time she left the Mega Dojo again, she had a lot in her mind, enough that she immediately set a time for the Dueling Hearts to all meet up to talk, 2 nights later at Wilson's. They met just after dark when the dojo was closed. Joe was sitting inside on one of 4 fold-out chairs that she had set up for them to use, with only the minimum number of interior lights turned on when the others arrived almost all at the same time. Despite that Joe had been planning how to start this conversation all evening, it was actually Sarah who spoke first, asking, "Okay, what's with all the melodrama?" Joe was immediately disarmed. "I'm not being melodramatic." The other 3 Dueling Hearts laughed. "Yeah, you are, dude," Tucker told her. "You brought us here after dark to a closed dojo to tell us some big important thing. You do this kind of thing all the time." Joe's left eye twitched. They'd figured her out, but it didn't matter. "This is important, though," she told them. "I'm sure it is," Jen replied, sitting down in the folding chair across from Joe. She had her hair up today, except for the colored parts of her bangs, which hung down over the left side of her face. She was wearing just enough makeup to make her eyes seem a little sunken, and a similar combination of clothing articles as she had been at the match, save for a pair of knee-high black and purple striped socks and black boots. "Yeah," Sarah added, sitting down next to Jen. "The only reason any of us still pay attention to you when you pull something like this is because it means you have something important to say." She was wearing a yellow t-shirt with a white stripe down the left side and a black 9 on the right breast, matching yellow and white shorts and black cleats. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail, reminding Joe that Sarah had just come from soccer practice. "I'd still listen to you," Tucker told Joe, taking the seat next to her. He was wearing black shorts and a black t-shirt under a brown jacket with red stripes down the arms and the symbol for the Checker Township Fire Department on the left breast. Joe remembered when he'd found the jacket the previous year at a Goodwill. Joe frowned at her friends and then said, "This is all beside the point. I went day before yesterday and talked to the guy at the Mega Dojo." "And he apologized to you?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms. "Yeah," Joe replied and continued, "and he asked me something. Something that got me thinking. We have a decision to make. We formed this team to compete in the exhibition match, not so we could start a career as professional fighters. I mean, I've thought about it. I know you have too." She looked over at Tucker and he nodded. "I'm not sure we're ready for something like that." "I know I'm not," said Sarah. "I haven't even graduated middle school yet. I'm pretty sure most major tournaments wouldn't even let me enter at my age." "What is this all about, Joe?" Jen asked in the thoughtful way she often did when she was fairly certain she'd already worked out the answer. Joe took a deep breath. What she had to tell the other Dueling Hearts was exciting, but it was also a huge deal, one that could shake up their lives for a long time to come. It wasn't a question that they could take lightly. "I don't know exactly why," Joe told her friends. "If it was because we really impressed someone, or if it was to make up for what that guy said. But Prometheus Corporation has offered to make us the face of the Mega Dojo. We'll get the free memberships that they already promised, plus a guaranteed entry into Mega Dojo events in our area, and wherever they end up building more Mega Dojos later on, and financial help if we decide to pursue careers as soul fighters." "That is a pretty big deal," Jen said, nodding. Joe couldn't tell from her cousin's reaction if she had been right about what Joe had had to say, and Jen didn't confirm one way or another. Instead, she thought for a second and then asked, "How official will this be? Will we need to get our parents involved? Will there be contracts? Will we be obligated to do anything?" "There will be contracts," Joe answered, "so we will need our parents' permission. We'll be expected to compete in major Mega Dojo events, if we can, and train there every now and then." "It's going to be hard," Sarah told her sister. "I have other extracurriculars, and I'm not ready to give them up." "Which is why," Joe told Sarah and the others, "we don't just have to decide if we want to keep the team together, and if we want to do this, but if we want to expand the team. We each know at least one other good soul fighter, our cousin Em, for one, or Kimmy. If we add a few more people to the team, then we'll have relief in case one or more of us can't make it to a match." "Your cousin Em?" Tucker asked. "Isn't she like 8 years old?" The others ignored him, and Jen said, "I wouldn't be opposed to this, assuming that we can break this off any time without legal ramifications. I've considered a career as a fighter before. Something like this would give me a chance to feel out whether or not it's for me without having to give up on school and travel around." "If we bring in more people," Sarah announced, "then I'm all for it." Joe looked over at Tucker. He frowned. "You know I want to be a pro, but I just don't know if my dad'll go for this. Hell, he might say no just to spite me, like that field trip 2 years ago." "Then we'll forge his name," Joe told her best friend, "like we did on your permission slip. If you want to do this, I'll make it happen, no matter what." Tucker thought about it for a second, and then finally said, "Yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's become pros." The 4 fighters beamed at each other. They were excited, and they were proud. All of that was sapped away, however, when they heard a slow clapping from the direction of the dojo's main entrance. The Dueling Hearts turned as one toward the noise. They had been so wrapped up in their conversation that they hadn't heard anyone enter, let alone the 3 people who now stood before them. 2 of them were male. The tallest of them had light brown hair and hazel eyes that scrutinized the Dueling Hearts harshly. He wore a black t-shirt with a golden dragon decal printed across the chest, torn and faded black jeans, and a chain strapped to his belt loops. The next tallest, the other male of the group, had longer, darker hair that stuck out in random directions, but there was a certain order to that chaos. He wore a pressed button-up shirt under a purple silk vest and black slacks. The look that he gave the Dueling Hearts was one of indifference. The third, however, was the one who caught Joe's eye and moved her to stand. The only female of this group of interlopers stood in front of her 2 male companions. She was the shortest of the 3 by only a few inches. Joe guessed her to be an inch or 2 shorter than herself, and, like the other 2, to be about Joe's age. She was gorgeous, with silky brown hair that flowed down her back, and eyes a shade or so lighter than Joe's that shone like marbles behind square-framed glasses. Pale freckles dotted her nose and cheeks. She didn't have the physique of a fighter, instead having a rather womanly figure despite her age. She looked like she could be a model, and yet, just looking at her, Joe felt something strange. As if this young woman were the most imposing presence that she had ever encountered. Joe had to stop herself from staring. It was the young woman who had been clapping. "That's inspiring," she told Joe and Tucker, looking upon them and the other 2 Dueling Hearts with amusement. The others must have also sensed something odd from these 3, or they were just following Joe's lead, because they stood as well and faced the 3. After a second to find her voice, Joe said, "Sorry, but if you're here to join Wilson's dojo, you'll have to wait until tomorrow. It's technically closed right now." "That's not why we're here," the brown-haired girl replied. "I'm Karen," she announced, "and these are my teammates, Peter Lawrence," she gestured to her tallest companion, "and Montgomery Williams," she gestured to the guy in the silk vest. "Call us Monty and Lawrence," Monty interjected. "We represent an organization called the Soul Takers," Karen continued, "and we've come looking for you 4. You were impressive in your recent victory against Team Beatdown." Joe relaxed a little bit. These 3 still gave off a strange vibe, but now she at least had an idea of why they were here. Since beating Team Beatdown, there had been plenty of amateur fighters and fans of Heart-to-Hearts who had approached her and the other Dueling Hearts wherever they went. Some wanted to praise them, some wanted to go at them for beating their favorite pro team, and others attempted to challenge them. Joe was getting a little sick of it. She simply wasn't used to the attention yet, but with that being the reason for these 3 showing up, it at least gave her an idea of how to get rid of them quickly. "I'm glad you guys liked the fight," Joe told them, stepping closer to them, noticing as she did how nervous she became as she grew closer to Karen. "But this place is private property. I work here, so I'm allowed here after hours, but you're technically trespassing." Joe smiled nicely at each of them in turn. "But if you come back tomorrow, I'll be here and we can talk about the match." She made to guide the interlopers to the door, but stopped when Karen said, "Actually, that's not why we're here either." Joe took a couple uneasy steps back. "Do you want to challenge us?" she asked, starting to get a little concerned. These 3 weren't really dressed for a fight, but that didn't really mean anything. A lot of soul fighters were practiced at fighting in their regular clothing. If these 3 did want to fight the Dueling Hearts, and they were willing to come here at this hour to issue their challenge, then they were likely very serious about it. Karen smiled. "Yeah, I guess you could say it's something like that." Joe nodded and suppressed a frown, saying, "Well, the same point still stands. The dojo is closed until tomorrow. Come by then, and I'll spar with you guys a little." "We don't want to spar with you," Karen countered. "We want a heart-to-heart, and we aren't asking." She smiled again. "Isn't it true that the old man who runs this place sleeps in the room behind the offices?" She glanced in the direction of the wall separating the main section of the dojo from Wilson's apartment. Standing by the door, the 3 interlopers were relatively close to it. Before Joe even realized what Karen was really saying, Karen nodded to Lawrence, and he reached toward the wall. As he flexed his arm, without any warning at all, that arm became surrounded in a huge avatar of an arm, even longer than Lawrence's entire body. It was a similar golden color to the animal avatars that Jason had created with his soul during the exhibition match, but where the color of Jason's avatar had been a pale yellow gold, this avatar shone a proud, bright gold that lit up the room. The huge arm didn't have the proportions of a human arm. There was a texture to it, like scales, and it ended in 4 long, clawed fingers. Its claws were less than an inch from the wall, and the arm was not fully outstretched. If Lawrence so chose, he could extend the huge arm even further and knock the wall over onto the sleeping Wilson. He might even be able to reach inside and attack Wilson with it. "What is this?" Joe asked, stunned. It's exactly what it looks like, Karen answered. If you don't agree to fight us, we'll kill the old man. And if you're standing there thinking that whatever we try, you four can stop us, I promise you Lawrence is just trying to be visually impressive. If we want the old man dead, we won't have to rely on Lawrence's power. Any one of us can do it in seconds, and we're closer to him. Really think about it. Are you sure you can stop all three of us when you don't even know what we're capable of? Joe looked to the others. Jen was considering the Soul Takers carefully. Tucker looked like he was ready to attack them. Sarah looked somewhere between nervous and angry. Joe didn't know if her friends would back her. She didn't even know if she wanted them to, as serious as these three were. But she was not going to let them hurt Wilson. Fine, Joe said. There's a lot out back. I'll fight the three of you there. Karen smiled again and shook her head. Sorry, no. It's all of you or none of you. Joe was about to protest, but she didn't have a chance. Tucker stepped up next to her. If you guys want to fight, we'll give you one. You don't get to just go around making threats like that, said Sarah, ignoring the sweat running down her face. There's only 3 of you, said Jen logically, and 4 of us, so our chances are good. But in exchange for this, you have to leave once the fight is over. Karen nodded. As she did, Lawrence lowered his arm to his side and the avatar around it faded away. Shall we? Karen asked, and she and her companions led the way to the back lot of Wilson's dojo, with Joe and the Dueling Hearts following close behind. The back of the building was fairly well lit. A couple of nearby street lights, as well as a security light positioned above the back door of the building, made sure of that. Fighting here wouldn't be a problem, and Joe was personally at a pretty huge advantage, seeing how the 3 lights cast deep shadows that crossed each other at multiple points. If Joe was careful, she could use Shadow Step almost anywhere on the lot without having to stop even once. Even if these guys had seen the fight with Christopher, they wouldn't be ready for that. The 2 groups reached their fighting stage and took up positions at opposite ends of the lot. It was the tallest one, Lawrence, who stepped onto the rubbery ground first, cracking his knuckles. I get the first fight, he said, his voice dripping with eager confidence. Listening to him, Joe was almost reminded of Tucker. How are we going to handle this? Joe asked Karen. It was clear that she was the decision-maker of the group, after all. We can't have a proper teams match with an uneven number. Karen thought for a second. How about this? We'll have 3 separate heart-to-hearts. Monty and I will each fight 1 member of your team. Lawrence, since he's so eager, will fight the remaining 2. If your team wins even 1 victory, the 3 of us will leave. Joe was surprised. Karen sounded completely serious, and yet what she'd said didn't make any sense. Lawrence was fighting first. If they only fought 3 heart-to-hearts, then that would mean that Karen intended for Lawrence to fight 2 people at the same time. There was no way he could win something like that. He'd lose, and Monty and Karen wouldn't get a chance to fight at all. And still, it was the fastest way to get rid of these guys, so... Okay, Joe agreed. She was about to offer to be one of the fighters to take on Lawrence when Tucker cut her off. I'll fight you, Tucker announced, stepping forward and facing Lawrence. They glared at each other, and static leapt between them as their competitive energies mixed. Me too, declared Jen, stepping forward as well. Joe moved to stop her, but Jen cut her off, saying in a voice too quiet for Karen and her group to hear, These guys are too confident. If they think that this Lawrence guy is tough enough to take on 2 of us at once, and he's not even the one in charge, then the others could be even stronger. We need to save our best for last. She looked to Joe and Sarah in turn, and our best is you 2, hands down. Besides, we all saw how big the arm of Lawrence's avatar is. My gravity powers will have a huge effect on something that size. I'm the best choice to fight him. The decision is obvious. Joe couldn't find any fault in Jen's reasoning. That was pretty common. None of the Dueling Hearts were stupid, except for Tucker sometimes, and Joe liked to think of herself as being uncommonly clever, but Jen was on a whole other level. She could come up with incredible strategies on the fly, and her creativity with soul went far beyond Joe's. It was never about pride or thrills with Jen. She felt those things, sure, but she approached each fight logically. If she was volunteering to fight someone, it was because she had thought it through and determined that she was the most likely to beat them. So Joe nodded, and Jen stepped up beside Tucker. The amount of energy filling the air increased even more, yet Joe found her eyes once again wandering to Karen. She had to fight to peel them away and focus on the impending action. In the makeshift ring of rubberized turf, Jen took up her usual tight stance, while Tucker stood with his arms up, but his stance loose and open. Meanwhile, Lawrence paid the 2 of them little mind, not even bothering to guard. Joe found his behavior insulting, even though it was the same kind of thing that she often did to fighters that she didn't expect could beat her. Was this Lawrence's attitude as well? Was he so convinced that he was stronger than 2 of the Dueling Hearts at once? Even if he was convinced, he was wrong. No one was that powerful. Karen, though, didn't seem concerned. The way she stood so nonchalantly on her team's side of the makeshift arena, you would never know that she had started this match by threatening a man's life. You would never know that her teammate was in a bad situation where he could easily find himself seriously hurt. Either she was just as unconcerned as Lawrence himself, or she just didn't care. In fact, she seemed almost impatient to get things started. She looked from Jen, Tucker, and Lawrence to Joe, and said with a surprisingly pleasant grin, "Let's make this official, shall we?" She changed her tone, making herself sound as formal as possible. Team Dueling Hearts versus the Soul Takers. Round 1. Let the heart-to-heart begin.